Mr. Hastings, comments, I would assume specific to the legislation that you have before us today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And let me once again thank you for your courtesy because, as you know, this was scheduled earlier and you postponed it until this date to accommodate so that we could get witnesses here. So I thank you for that courtesy. And and we do have two witnesses from home. So I appreciate the opportunity to hear my Bill 2806, which allows for continued public access to the North Cascades National Park from the community of Stehekin, Washington. I'm pleased to welcome State Senator Linda Parlett Evans, who will be testifying later. She has long family ties to the Stehekin community and has been tireless in her efforts to ensure access to the National Park. I'm also pleased to welcome newly elected Chelan County Commissioner Doug England, who also will testify later on, and he was elected just last November to the county government. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to visit Stehekin, the gateway to the North Cascades National Park, this community is located at the western end of Lake Chelan, and listen to this, it is accessible only by boat, float plane, or a multi-day hike. In other words, it is relatively isolated. From the town of Stehekin, the Stehekin Valley Road has long allowed residents and visitors access to some of the most beautiful scenery in the North Cascades. Recognizing its value to local residents and tourists, the road was specifically protected when the park and wilderness areas were created. Stehekin Road has for many years been maintained and run by park officials, but following extreme flooding and subsequent changes in the course of the river, much of the road now is underwater. Because the road occupies a narrow corridor within the borders of the Stephen Maher Wilderness Area, congressional approval is required to modify the corridor prior to the Park Service rebuilding the road. During legislative consideration of the park's creation in 1988, Congress determined that the Stehekin Road would remain exempt from the restrictions of other wilderness areas. Otherwise, no cars, mountain bikes, or other mechanized vehicles would have been allowed to transport area residents or park visitors to the wilderness areas north of the community of Stehekin. Former U.S. Senator and Washington State Governor Dan Evans, the author of the 1988 Act creating the park, has written to emphasize that it was Congress's intent to allow for continued road access to the park. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that his letter be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Failure to fix the road will keep many visitors from entering the park and will reduce the number of visitors to the region and to this tourism-dependent community. My bill would authorize the National Park Service to adjust the wilderness boundary for the sole purpose of rebuilding the closed section of the roadway from the Stehekin River, provided that there is no net loss of wilderness acreage. All federal environmental laws, including the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act, would have to be complied with for the road to be moved. Now, at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to point out what we're going to hear as far as testimony from other witnesses. 3 weeks ago, this committee approved a bill, H.R. 1061, that was authored by my good friend from Washington, Mr. Dix, which gave away 36 acres of the Olympic National Park without compensation for the purpose of building a road. In a July 9th letter to Mr. Bishop, ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Wenk and the Park Service endorsed the road and land giveaway in H.R. 1061. So they endorsed the giveaway of this land in just 3 weeks ago. But today, the Park Service opposes a road that will result in no net loss. It will result in no net loss of wilderness area for the residents of Stehekin. So I look forward to hearing an explanation from Mr. Wenk on this obvious double standard. I also understand that the Park Service will oppose this bill, citing, quote, higher priorities, unquote. If keeping our nation's promises to local residents affected by federal policies is not a high priority, and if ensuring the public's access to their national parks and other federal lands is not a high priority, then I'd like to know what the priorities are of the National Park Service. But once again, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased that the subcommittee will have this opportunity to hear from the two representatives from home, Senator Parlett and Commissioner England, on the importance of this issue to this local community and to all visitors that visit the wilderness areas in the northern part of Washington. With that, thank you again for your courtesy, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let me begin with Mr. Daniel Wenk, Acting Director, National Park Service, who will speak to H.R. 2802 and 2806. Sir?
H.R. 2806 would authorize the Secretary of Interior to adjust the boundary of Stephen P. Mather Wilderness within the North Cascades National Park Complex to allow the rebuilding of a road outside of the floodplain. The Department opposes enactment of H.R. 2806 because of our concerns about potential impacts to the park natural resources, inconsistency with the intention of the Wilderness Act, and our position of not rebuilding roads and parks after natural disasters where no visitors are found, where no visitor facilities are found along or at the end of the road. In addition, with limited financial resources, the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of a new road are a lower priority than other needs of the National Park Service. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Let me, Mr. Wenk, let me use the opportunity here to ask you some questions. First, on the issue of buffer zone that my good friend Mr. Bishop brought up at our markup. The assumption or the fact, and that's why I'm asking you the question, that the National Park Service can establish and seeks to establish buffer zones outside the boundary of park units, and then with that having the ability to exert control over land use decisions in that buffer zone. The suggestion is that we need at least language in every piece of legislation prohibiting buffer zone, and that should be a standard. Just for the record, to your knowledge, does the National Park Service have the legal authority to control land use on land outside the boundaries of the national park?
Mr. Chairman, we have no legal authority except as provided by law outside of a park boundary.
And the point about seeking to establish buffer zone outside these parks?
I am not aware of any place where the National Park Service is seeking to establish a buffer zone around a national park.
And here's the other part of it. And that's, do MPS employees have the right or perhaps even the duty to develop opinions regarding land uses that might impact park resources, number one? Do those employees have the right or even the duty to express those opinions publicly and work as neighboring land managers to prevent an activity that might be harmful to that resource?
Mr. Chairman, the Organic Act of the National Park Service does provide us or holds us responsible to ensure that the resources of our national parks are protected unimpaired. When a manager of a national park unit, whether as part of a cooperating agency with another, federal agency, or working with state organizations that may adjoin national park areas, or working with local communities, I believe we absolutely have a responsibility as part of the public or as a cooperating agency to comment on any activities outside of park boundaries that may affect the resources of a national park area. We do that as part of public process. We do that as an adjacent landowner, and we do it in a very transparent and open manner.
Okay, thank you. If Congress were to pass a law or part of any legislation prohibiting buffer zones, how would you interpret that prohibition, number one, the department, and would that prohibition prevent, my last part of the question, an employee from expressing their professional opinions regarding outside activities outside the park boundaries? And what impact would that have on resources at all?
I'm unable to answer your last question first. I don't know the impact on resources because these are looked at on an individual basis as proposals are for development may occur outside of park boundaries. If there was a prohibition on establishing buffer zones, I think that would have little impact because we are not pursuing established buffer zones. I would say that a buffer zone would seem to me to still have the same requirement if one was created by some act or some other purpose. if there was a buffer zone or a prohibition against buffer zones, I think the responsibility of the National Park Service and its employees to review and look at development outside of national park areas to see if that development has potential impacts or may cause impairment to park resources is still inherent in our mission, and we would, I believe, have a responsibility to comment on development that would impair park resources outside of park boundaries.
So short of a gag rule, the opinion would continue to be expressed.
I believe we have an absolute responsibility under the Organic Act to protect park resources from impairment, and as part of any public process, we would desire to express that opinion in view that would be considered in the public process.
Thank you.
Specifically to the Hastings bill, has the National Parks Service conducted any inventory of public comments dealing with management of this particular area?
Mr. Bishop, I guess I can't tell you the specific time frame, but I believe that the decision not to reopen this was part of a plan. I will have to find that out specifically for you. I'm sorry, I don't know the specific.
The information I've received is that public comments were taken.
Okay.
And I think I will allow Mr. Hastings to refresh me or correct me if over 90% of the public comments were not in favor of keeping this road open. Do you happen to know who built the original road that was washed out?
I do not know who constructed it.
Did the pioneers who went to that area, being smarter than the CCC during the New Deal era who built the road that was washed out, did they have an alternative route in that particular area that was replaced by the CCC when they rebuilt that stupid road that was washed out?
Mr. Bishop, I can't answer that question specifically.
I'll allow Mr. Hastings to correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that there was a pioneer path that was the road before the CCC rebuilt the road in the wrong place, and that his proposal is to take the original pioneer route to replace that particular road. Will there be a loss of wilderness area if you do what the pioneers did and make the route to allow access into this area in the place it was originally designed?
Not according to the bill as introduced. There'd be no net loss.
I appreciate that. And I would assume you would say that if the road was grandfathered in by an act of Congress, that was the intent of Congress to do so?
Yes.
I like that. Did Superintendent Steve Martin recommend establishing a buffer zone around the Grand Canyon National Park at any point during this year?
Not to my knowledge.
Then we'll refresh you on that one too at a later date as well. What is the policy towards view sheds and viewscapes?
The policy is that if there is a development outside of a National Park Service area that would affect the view shed or viewscape from within the National Park area, we would consult with the individual, if it's before a planning commission, with a community, with a state, or with another federal agency to assess the impact of that development and ask for their consideration.
In the terminology of Washington, do you consider that different than a buffer zone?
I consider it vastly different from a buffer zone.
That may be one of the terminology differences we have. The chairman from Arizona was suggested maybe a gag order could potentially be used, and I would suggest, Secretary Gates in the Department of Defense has established that kind of precedent for you. You might consider what he did as what you can do as well. With that, Mr. Wank, I will present once again that's a statement, the questions that I had, and would ask you once again also to review the road concept, because what you're trying to do, what Representative Hastings and the people of Washington are trying to do, is reestablish the road the pioneers had instead of the road that the New Deal era created, and put it back there so access is available to all citizens, and that's a worthy cause. As to the other two bills, I like them.
On that note, Chairman Ray Hall.
You want to yield back? Reconsider that now. And remind me next time your birthday comes up. I'll send you a birthday card.
By a vote of 3 to 5, but yeah.
I have no question, Mr. Chairman, except to thank, of course, the Forest Service for supporting our study on the Elk River. Appreciate it, and also appreciate the work that both of you gentlemen do in the Department of Interior. You are responsible stewards of our public lands, and you do very valuable public service to our people. We thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastings, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wenk, why did 3 weeks ago you sent a letter to Mr. Bishop saying that you're in favor of a land exchange with absolutely no compensation, not even a land exchange, just giving up 36 acres of land with, where the reason why that happened is because Mother Nature, i.e. a river, washed out the road. And then you're opposed to this one where Mother Nature has washed out a road. And there's no net losses, Mr. Bishop just asked you.
The proposed conveyance, Mr. Hastings, to the Ho tribe involves, we believe, a different set of circumstances. We would support the legislation to convey that 37 acres to the Ho tribe to help them address their life, health, safety concerns arising from the current.
Okay, let me hear, because I only have some time. So you're doing this because you're worried about the people, in this specific case, the Ho tribe. I supported that bill. I thought it was good.
Thank you.
What about the citizens of Stehekin who depend on tourism and trade and getting people to go up in the North Cascade wilderness areas, and they have to get up there by going through this road? Isn't the reasons that you just suggested exactly the same for the citizens that live in Stehekin?
The access is the same issue in both cases, yes, Mr. Hastings. The difference, I would tell you, is the fact that we would still be providing access, however not motorized or mechanized access on that section of the road.
If the intent, however, as Senator Evans, then Senator Evans said, and he was the author of the bill, was to allow as much access to these areas, including motorized, because that was the way it was at that time the bill passed, what has changed other than Mother Nature washing out the road? The intention was exactly the same, access to wilderness areas.
That is the change is the Mother Nature has washed out the road, the difficulty of keeping the road built in place.
What was the intent of Congress, though?
I believe the intent of Congress was to provide automobile access on that road.
Okay, so under what authority then has your position changed?
We are providing testimony with our opinion. If Congress chooses to pass this bill, we will in fact do what.
In other words, you don't have an opinion based on statutory law or based on the intent of Congress.
Mr. Hastings, our intent is to follow the intent of Congress whenever we can.
In that case, then you should be supporting the bill. Pretty simple. I want you to, you have a phrase in here on why you oppose 2806, and I'd like you to elaborate on that. It's in your second paragraph, and it says, opposes 2806, and you have a few other reasons. Then it says, and our position of not rebuilding roads in parks in the Cascades after natural disasters where no visitor facilities are found along or at the end of the road. So that policy is specifically for the Cascades, is that correct?
Mr. Hastings, I saw that when I reviewed the testimony again yesterday. I saw that statement. I believe to say in Cascades was an inappropriate and incorrect statement.
Okay, let's take the Cascades out. Tell us where the other authority comes from, where it is because there are not any facilities beyond or on the road. Where does that come from?
That would be not an authority. It would be a policy of the National Park Service.
Where is that policy found? Where is it written down?
I would have to get you the specific site.
It would seem to me that okay, if somebody writes this statement and they inadvertently put in Cascades, and you at least know where the original statement comes from. So now you're telling me that you don't know exactly where that policy comes from.
Mr. Hastings, I would say it comes from the National Park Service management policies. The specific site I'll have to get you.
When can you get that for us?
I'll get it to you by the end of this week.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah. Oh, and Mr. Bishop advised me that he'd like to have his by the end of the week too. Since you're making, that would satisfy both of us. So we would look forward to that as we go on our August district work period. Okay, Mr. Wenk, I have to say I'm not satisfied with the distinction that you're saying between what happened 3 weeks ago and now, because the arguments that you used were the same. You acknowledge that the intention of Congress when they passed the North Cascade Wilderness was to have access, however it was. So I'm disappointed that your agency has taken this position. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Hastings, if I could, I appreciate your comment and understand your comment. There is one other distinction just to bring to your attention. and that is that the Olympic National Park area, I'm told, is not an area that was wilderness designation.
No, but it's, but the point is you're administered by the Park Service, you know, in both cases. I mean, it's,
Yes.
and by the way, the distinction is access to a wilderness area in this case.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Mr. Wank, excuse me, did the Park Service conclude that the new area of the new road would protect from any future flooding and destruction? Has there been an assessment, and what is the road plan to prevent any flooding from damaging the road?
The environmental work has not yet been done on the new section as it would be allowed by the bill. The environmental assessments would need to be done, and as well as specific designs would need to be done if this is enacted.
Now, this is a road that is only utilized by vehicles, by foot traffic, by pedestrians, by visitors?
Currently, because it has been washed out and not rebuilt, it's only by non-mechanized travel. It could be horse, it could be foot traffic. If rebuilt, it would be open to vehicle traffic as well.
Now, is the flooding how often does that occur? Is it only seasonal? Is it?
There's been some, how often occurs, there were significant floods that closed the first portion in 1995. I think in subsequent years, basically, and that closed the last 3 miles of the trail. In the past few years, we've had flooding up to the area of Car Wash Falls that have actually closed about 12 miles of the road, and it's a seasonal, periodic, or basis just based on the weather and the snowfall, et cetera, at any given time. It's unpredictable.
So knowing that, the assessment would then provide you with information to build some kind of protection for that future road.
I think the intent is to relocate the road in areas that would not be susceptible to flooding and to washout, and to do it in I would say it's an environmentally sustainable manner as possible in a new location.
Is there currently, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was done, I'm sorry.
Is there currently signage to warn pedestrians, visitors, of the dangers of flooding?
I believe I do not know, I cannot speak specifically to what signs exist. My belief would be is that these would not be unanticipated circumstances, that it would not be from a sudden rainstorm that would cause this kind of damage. It would be sustained flooding based on snowpack and rainfall in the spring.
But during those minor events, it is not something that would endanger a human being or a horse?
I don't believe that's the case, no.
Okay. What does it cost to reroute that new 100-foot corridor in that North Cascades Park outside of the wilderness and flooding areas?
In the estimate that was done in 2004, the cost was approximately between 1.3 and 1.5 million. That's a cost estimate that's not based on the environmental work that would need to be done, which we would estimate about another $500,000, would take approximately 3 years.
And that's 05 figures?
Those were 04 figures.
04. 5 years.
Yes.
What would be the guesstimate?
My guess would be it'd be between $2 and $2.5 million in today's cost.
Does that new 100-foot corridor include any of the upper section of the road in the upper valley, or would the entire area be environmentally damaged if it was built upon that area?
The new section of road that I just discussed was just the upper valley. We are looking at improvements to the lower valley road, which is an additional approximately $6 million of improvements to that road.
So that's not included then in your estimate of that 100-foot corridor?
No, it is not.
What plans are being made to assure that this is addressed in the future, or if any?
Absent this legislation, the National Park Service would maintain and operate that corridor as pedestrian or horse access only on that upper section. So if and when this legislation is enacted, we would immediately begin the environmental review and the planning, and then the construction of the road.
How much does this mean to that area economically?
I do not have that figure. Obviously, that it is a, if you will, a long-standing use that had been occurred within Stehekin area of the park, and I think others may be able to better answer your question in terms of what the economic and social impact of not having that is.
And of course, the impact of the environment.
Yes. Well,
ecology.
I think our concern was being able to sustain the road, and that that the environmental impact is something that will continue for years if and when we would ever have to relocate the road again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before I ask Mr. Hastings, Mr. Wenk, let me just follow up a little bit on the precedent question that Mr. Hastings brought up and others have brought up. When we did Mr. Dick's bill about 3 weeks ago, there was the conveyance to the whole nation of those 37 acres. How's the situation we're talking about today different from that situation? And that issue was health and safety to a great extent, but is there a precedent? And I think that's the point that Mr. Hastings is repeating over and over again.
The legislation that you marked up 3 weeks ago would allow the tribe to manage the connection between their existing land and land they're acquiring, not from the National Park Service, but from other private sources on higher ground as they relocate their community. There would be no, and two other important points, the land being conveyed would be protected from new development in the whole area, and there would be no cost involved to the National Park Service. The National Park Service or the Department's support for the conveyance to the whole tribe should not be, we don't believe it should be viewed as a precedent for moving land from protected status in order to facilitate the building of a road. One was wilderness, one was not. Development and connection of two important two areas for the whole, I think, are the precedents that we are citing.
Real briefly, and I appreciate my friend from California's line of questioning, and again, the courtesy that the subcommittee has given us to get our witnesses to perhaps answer those questions as to the economic consequences of not having that road. So your line of questioning, I hope, will be answered more directly by Commissioner England and Senator Parlett in the next panel. So I appreciate your line of questioning on that, because this is an important part. Tourism, in fact, is what drives the economy in Stehekin. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And let me thank the gentleman. I know, Mr. Holtrup, you're exhausted from having to answer all those questions. But thank you, gentlemen, and let me invite the next panel up. Linda Evans Parlett, Washington State Senator, 12th District. Madam Senator.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva and Congressman Bishop and members of the committee for hearing the bill, which I'm supportive of H.R. 2806. For the record, my name is Linda Evans Parlett. I am the Washington State Senator for the 12th Legislative District in North Central Washington. My district includes the community of Stehekin, the Lake Chelan Recreation Area, and the North Cascades National Park. I have submitted 12 pages of detailed written testimony for the record. On page 3 of that written testimony, you will learn about the visitor centers that are in the North Cascade National Park. Let me quickly define the issue. Part of a historic primitive road which provided the only vehicular access into the North Cascade National Park from Stehekin, a road that is approximately 12 miles long, washed out due to an historic flood in 2003. This road, Mr. Chair, was there prior to the North Cascades National Park being created in 1968. This road was there before the 1988 Washington Parks Wilderness Act. Matter of fact, this road was there in 1899 when my grandfather, Ray O'Neill, worked on one of the original small ferries that traveled from Chelan to Stehekin. Bottom line, this road to Cottonwood Camp, also known as the Upper Stehekin Valley Road, has existed since the 19th century. As a result of the 2003 flood, the National Park Service did an environmental assessment on the Upper Stehekin Valley Road in 2006. 90% of those who gave comments supported the road to Cottonwood Camp staying open. The most viable option was Alternative D. Alternative D would move the small portion of the 12-mile road that continually washes out to where the pioneers built the road in the 19th century, away from the meandering Stehekin River, a common-sense solution to move that section to the old wagon road. The National Park Service, however, concluded that they did not have the authority to move the section of the road as proposed in Alternative D of the 2006 environmental assessment due to the constraints of the Washington Parks Wilderness Act. With all due respect to the National Park Service, Mr. Chair, I am shocked and quite disappointed at the National Park Service's testimony against this bill. As recent as August 8, 2008, the Olympic National Park General Management Plan was approved by a record of decision signed by Regional Director John Jarvis and subsequently published in the Federal Register on November 12, 2008. My written testimony states the exact language used for Olympic National Park, and due to the previous comments, I will read it. If the road relocation away from the river meander areas is feasible, wilderness boundary modifications would be sought as necessary with no net loss of total Olympic National Park wilderness acreage. I ask you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, why, when the wilderness areas by law were added for Mount Rainier, Olympic, and the North National Cascade Parks all at the same time, are different management standards allowed? This is nothing short of disparate treatment and unequal application of the law. I support H.R. 206 because it would restore access to rustic park facilities and scenic wilderness areas within the North Cascades National Park. A visitor to Stehekin could once again access the wilderness trails in a weekend. I support H.R. 2806 because it enables the intent of the original co-sponsors of the bill, former three-term Washington State Governor and United States Senator Daniel J. Evans and the late U.S. Senator Brock Adams. That is to say, it was their intent to maintain a recreational access corridor in the designated wilderness area within the North Cascade National Park. Former Senator Dan Evans has provided written testimony. I also support H.R. 2806 because it would allow the National Park Service to remain in compliance with the 1995 General Management Plan for the Lake Chelan National Recreation Area, which calls for the road to Cottonwood Camp to remain open. I also would be supportive of a narrower version of H.R. 2806, which could clearly state that notwithstanding any other provision of the law, the National Park Service shall build the road consistent with Alternative D of the Upper Stehekin Valley Road environmental assessment of 2006. And to conclude, Mr. Chair, Senator Evans stated when he introduced the legislation in 1988, and I quote, if I could turn the page here, "What the bill would not do is keep the park visitors shut out of the park. All of the existing transportation and development corridors would be excluded from wilderness designation," end of quote. Stehekin means the way through. It is time to reopen the way through. Congress should recognize this historic grandfathered access to the Upper Stehekin Valley, just as Senator Evans envisioned, so that we can maintain and even increase the number of citizens and taxpayers who will appreciate and protect this magnificent park. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome questions.
Commissioner Doug England, Chelan County Commissioner, H.R. 2806. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, my name is Doug England, Commissioner, Chelan County, Washington. Thank you for making this hearing possible, and to Congressman Hastings for introducing important legislation for the people of our county. Fully 80% of our county is owned and controlled by the federal government. With a population of just over 70,000, the county's residents are joined by visitors from all over the world to ensure that it's unique and see its unique beauty. Historically, one of the most special places of all is the Stehekin Valley in the North Cascade National Park. Since it became known that this committee would hold this hearing, I have received a surge of calls reflecting frustration that no one is listening to our plea for common sense. Thank you, Congressman Hastings, for listening. The comments that I hear are all strikingly similar. Please allow my children and those not blessed with the time or the ability to share my experience of this beautiful valley. Let me draw heavily upon an editorial in the Yakima Herald-Republic written by Scott Sandberry to tell the story. It tells of a huge photograph of Horseshoe Basin that hung for years in the Stehekin Valley. Visitors marveled at the picture, then would ask for directions to see for themselves the area once described in a 1960 Sierra Club documentary film as a crown jewel of America's scenic grandeur. They don't ask that now. The photograph has been taken down. Locals got tired of having to tell visitors that unless they could don a backpack for a 30-mile round trip, they could no longer get to Horseshoe Basin, or for that matter, to a myriad of other backcountry designations. In the language of the native Indians, Stehekin meant the way through, but in October 2003, a 500-year flood washed out the Stehekin Valley Road, which a century earlier had gone nearly to Horseshoe Basin, dead-ending, to quote that same 1960 film, in paradise. Now it ends at a rather nondescript stop sign just 13 miles up the river. Now the National Park Service has opted to abandon the road upriver from that point, less than 2 miles into the park in the Stephen Mather Wilderness. Without that road, this doorway to heaven is already experiencing a dramatic drop in visitors using local transportation and the few struggling businesses that have found a home here. The firefighting crews have also lost access to fight the catastrophic wildfire they fear will be given birth within the park and roar into their world as a full-grown monster. Maintaining the way through requires only common sense. Parallel to the washed-out section runs the road's original route safely upslope from the river. Called the Old Wagon Road, it became part of the Pacific Crest Trail when the Civilian Conservation Corps replaced it with the road along the river. The solution is obvious. For those 2.5 miles, simply reroute the main corridor to the Old Wagon Trail and trade the Pacific Crest Trail back to the river, where a trail would be far easier to maintain. Mr. Chairman, what is the National Park's response to our plea? It is a flat-out no. The Stehekin Valley Road is bounded on both sides by the Mather Wilderness that, according to the National Park, cannot and will not be moved. Again, the answer is simple: change the law. There would be no net loss of wilderness. The Pacific Crest Trail users get a more beautiful route, and the 100-year-old, one-lane, primitive, summer-only road that starts and stops in Stehekin would be open. It is just common sense. Most environmental experts agree that the Old Wagon Trail was where the corridor should have been in the first place. It has been said that throughout the world there may be no place else quite like Stehekin, but who will know? As one resident puts it, it's like going to Disneyland and only getting to ride the cup and saucer. Representative Hastings' bill reflects the common sense desire of the people of Washington State. It provides for replacement of the washed-out road and nothing more. It does not take away from the wilderness experience, it only enhances it. Mr. Chairman, as you listen to environmental groups asking you to oppose this bill because replacing the Stehekin Road breaks precedent, ask yourself whether opposition to common sense solutions isn't denying the next generation of our children the same blessings that we enjoyed. They too will be asked to defend the wilderness that today's environmental groups claim to love. But if they never experience that same wilderness, how can they be expected to defend it? It should be noted that this wilderness was named after the first director of the National Park Service, who, and I quote, encouraged visitation to normally remote units of the system to thereby create a base of public support with those who had seen and gained a personal appreciation for them. It has been proposed that this wilderness be enlarged. How can your committee ask for our support after this insult to Stehekin? Mr. Chairman, as the people of my county ask for this legislation to be passed, please remember the goodwill that such an obvious common sense solution will provide to future wilderness defenders. Thank you, and thank you again, Congressman Hastings and members of the subcommittee, for your willingness to listen to our plea for reason.
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That last discussion on tourism in West Virginia was a good segue, I think, into asking my constituents how important, because it was alluded to several times by me and by Mrs. Napolitano from California, how important to both of you is tourism to the economy in Chelan County, and probably specifically today to Stehekin. And I'd ask either Commissioner England or Senator Parlett, or both.
Tourism is the only economy in Stehekin. It's a small community. It's the gateway to the national park system. Without access to that road, they have no economy. There have been dramatic drop in visitors, both using the amenities that are there and the amenities that were there before that happened. Chelan County itself is undergoing the same stresses that the rest of the nation is undergoing. It's part of a three-legged stool, and tourism is one of the most important ones and the only one that is holding its own now. And as we struggle to do that, if we do things that inhibit that source of income, it will have even more critical effect on the county itself.
Senator Parlett.
Yes, I would elaborate the same thing. The visitors who now go to Stehekin, perhaps if they stay in the area one night and then they are backpackers and go out of the valley, that's a different type of visitor than what we've had before. And time, we have so little time these days to recreate. The advantage of having the road reopened is in a weekend, you could go to Stehekin and then get up to the end of the road and access the wilderness, come back out, and get back home to work on Monday morning. That's a really important thing to remember. I would also like to clarify for people, the road that starts at Stehekin that goes up to High Bridge, at High Bridge, that's about 12 miles. That is the Lake Chelan National Recreational Area. The road that we're talking about, the remainder 12 miles, is into the North Cascade National Park. It's only a 12-mile road with just a small section of it being washed out. And I'd like to add, as far as the tourism part, as the commissioner said, that is the economic backbone along with the agricultural base that is really changing in Chelan County. So this is a really important piece of legislation.
And this, if I may, Mr. Chairman, this is one of the ironies that comes up. This is the unintended consequences of developing something to preserve for the future, which is exactly what the North Cascades were formed back in the 60s, and the wilderness area in 88, late 80s, was for people to go up there and enjoy the public lands. And so here we have a situation. This is the unintended consequences that I know you hear me talk about a lot of times. Well, we want to have that. We want to preserve it for people to enjoy, on the one hand, which is positive. On the other hand, then, you have the same people that are administering the land saying, no, we can't. For a reason that doesn't make sense, because it's contrary to what the intent of Congress was, as pointed out in Senator Evans' letter. Let me pursue, Senator Parlett, what you were alluding to as far as the time frame here. Now, the issue really is the getting up to other camps above, like Cottonwood Camp above. How much longer? And you may have touched on this just in your previous remarks, but how much longer is that if we don't repair that road, and the consequences of, from a time standpoint, of getting into the wilderness area? Explain.
Well, the road, the North Cascade National Park starts at High Bridge. So from High Bridge to Cottonwood is about 12 miles. If you go to Cottonwood, that is the access point for multiple trails into the wilderness, not into the Lake Chelan Recreation Area, but into the wilderness. My husband and I several times have hiked from Cottonwood up to the North Cascade Highway and back in one day. That's 18 miles. You can do that, but you can't start at High Bridge, hike 12 miles, and then do an additional 18 miles in one day. My parents this year will celebrate 65 years of marriage. They live in Lake Chelan. My father is an 86-year-old World War II Marine. He still goes to Stehekin every summer with my sons to fish. He no longer can access the area that he grew up fishing in because of his age. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, and again, the idea was to have access to the area which would promote tourism. But because of, at least in this case, testimony we're hearing from the Park Service, they don't want to do it for a variety of reasons that, frankly, I don't comprehend. Let me ask one thing. You talk about the old road. This legislation does not specify which road, simply to do a study and to come up with a solution to have a permanent road up there. So I think you touched on this, Senator Parlett, but how long has that road, just to refresh my memory, been going through the Stehekin Valley?
Since the 19th century, way back in the 1800s.
And let me think, that was before there was a national park, is that correct?
Yes, it became a national park in 1968. The Wilderness Act passed in 1988. As I told you before, my grandfather in 1899 came to Chelan, and his first job was working on the original ferry that went from Chelan to Stehekin. That road was there before my grandfather got there in 1899. Yeah. And as far as the work to be done, sir, this, if you read on my written testimony, page 6, it talks about an alternative approach. The study has already been done. Mm-hmm. It's not very often that somebody comes to you and I'm not asking for any money for a study. It has been done. Alternative D, which is the option that proposes moving the road, it is all laid out. The Park Service hired the National Forest Service in Wenatchee to flag it. All the work has been done, and the $1.3 million to get this all done is 2006 figures. In this day and age, when we have a recession, we are finding our bids, when we go out to bid in state and county projects, turn out to be less.
Right. Well, thank you very much for both of you for coming back here, and again for the courtesy of the committee to allow that time period so we could get witnesses to talk. But I just want to end my remarks by contrasting two different bills in two different parts of the country, and the unintended consequences that come when you don't have that local control that you would like to have, and that's the issue really here with this Stehekin Road. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings. And you've made such a compelling case, as well as your constituents and my constituents. We will mark up both of these bills on September 10th. Is that agreeable with the ranking member?
Well, I'd rather do it tomorrow, but September 10th would be fine.